Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1190, 1190, Tuesday, July the 14th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so welcome back to TowerGate, where we're going to talk about nothing but Spygate and related matters to Spygate. Now, as most of you know, we're in kind of a lull period right now. There's not a whole lot going on with Spygate. However, if there is ever any new breaking information or new information about Spygate, that's what I'll focus on first. But in light of that, I will go back and find other things. It may be older material. If it's relevant now or just need a refresher, then we'll talk about that. So that's kind of where we are today. There was nothing really new that broke today in the Spygate story. But as you recall, back in 2017, the House Joint Committee with Goodlatte and Gowdy did these behind closed doors interviews of around 53 people and related to Spygate. And of course, those were kept from us for a very long time. Finally, when Richard Grinnell became the acting DNI, he released that information. And so now we've been able to go back and read these transcripts of these interviews with all these people. 52, 53, I believe, was the number. Now, we've already talked about maybe 5 or 6 of those that I've gone through. But now that we have this lull, I'm going to go back and there's about another 25 or 30 that I'm definitely interested in. So we're going to go back and start looking at that that witness testimony from these 2017 hearings. Now, keep in mind, these are not totally unredacted. There are sometimes large portions of redactions in these witness testimony transcripts. Some of them, there's just a few redactions, but some of them I've looked at, there's large pockets, sections, swaths, if you will, of redactions. So, in light of the recent court case in London, we've learned some more things about how much more involved the Clinton campaign and the 2 lawyers representing the Clinton campaign, Michael Sussman and Marc Elias, were learning how much more involved they were than what had been previously reported other places. I, of course, have been talking about the fact that the Clinton campaign and Clinton herself and the people around her were much more involved in the Spygate conspiracy, coup, whatever you want to call it, than what everyone else has been reporting. I've believed for a long time that the Right Reverend Clinton was much more involved, while other people were focusing on Clapper and Brennan and Comey and Obama even now at this point. I've always said that I think that the origins of this and the primary person who was manipulating all this, who was, in my mind, planning, directing, organizing, controlling this, was the rotten Reverend Clinton. And I continue to believe that, and I believe that the evidence will bear that out as we continue to get more evidence. So I went back last night and I reviewed the testimony of Marc Elias. Of course, Marc Elias is the head attorney for Perkins Coie and their political division, where they have approximately 31 lawyers and 25 to 30 consultants working there. They have offices basically in D.C., Washington State, Arizona, and one other place. And they primarily focus on Democratic Party legal activism. Anything that has to do with the Democratic Party and their legal cases that they bring. Think about Perkins Coie as kind of a, not like a Judicial Watch, because Judicial Watch will do, they don't really care what your party is or whatever. But Perkins Coie is primarily a Democratic activist law firm. That's what they do there. Democratic Party activist legal issues. They deal with a lot of things on voting, and that's what Marc Elias specializes in. He is over all of the people in their political division, because Perkins Coie has many different divisions that they do, but one of their divisions is their political division, which is all focused on Democratic Party politics. They, of course, are the law firm for the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and other Democratic organizations. And in 2016, Perkins Coie, the firm and their political division, represented the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Marc Elias, of course, is the head of that, and the attorney who specifically was representing Hillary Clinton, Clinton for America, Hillary for America, was Michael Sussman, who works under Marc Elias. Now, we've already gone through Sussman's testimony and found that he, like most of these people, lie a lot. And you're going to find the same thing here with Marc Elias. Now, something I should also point out is I've done in previous videos when we're talking about these testimonies, what I find very interesting about every one of these testimonies is the lawyer that is representing almost all of the Democratic related witnesses, witnesses related to the Democratic Party. All of those witnesses are almost always represented by Katherine Rummler. Of course, Katherine Rummler was Obama's personal lawyer when he was president. And she has been described as Obama's fixer. Obama's fixer. So whenever you go through these transcripts, you will see that Rummler and one or two lawyers from her firm are always present when these witness testimonies are being given by these witnesses who are associated with Democrats. And you'll notice that in every one of these hearings where Rummler is representing these Democratic associated witnesses, she always starts off her presentation before the questioning begins by laying out all the things her client is not going to comment on, not going to talk about, and quite frequently throughout the interviews, she will prevent her client from answering questions. So the idea that the Democrats and Hillary Clinton and Perkins Coie and Fusion GPS and all these people who came into these hearings and just openly answered questions and were willing, cooperating witnesses and all this is total BS. You will find that throughout, Katherine Rummler starts from the very beginning laying out all the things that her client's not going to talk about, not going to answer to, and particularly in the case of Perkins Coie's lawyers, Sussman and Elias, because she lays out the case that they have attorney-client privilege, not just with information, their client themselves, but also the information or materials that may be related to any of the investigations. So you start off right from the very beginning with a wall in front of you that you have to kind of break down. The questioning through most of these witnesses on the Republican side was done by Himes and Gowdy. Himes and Gowdy, Jim Himes and Trey Gowdy, did most of the questioning. Kash Patel also contributed to some questions as well, and he was present at most of these interviews. He was the primary investigator for the Republican side and the Spygate thing. So that is a bit of the background that you need to know going in. Keep in mind that these are what you would consider hostile witnesses. They start off in the very beginning with Obama's fixer lawyer telling the committee right at the top, okay, he's not going to answer questions about this, he's not going to talk about that, and that created a lot of problems with getting answers to a lot of the questions that Gowdy and Himes had. It should be noted also on the Democrat side, the questioner was almost always Adam Schiff and two other people who I don't recognize. I assume that they work for the Democrats on that committee. So let's go through some of the questioning of Marc Elias and some of the things we learn. Now keep in mind, we just learned from the case in London, new information has come out from that case that shows that Elias and Sussman were much more involved than what they led us to believe based on this questioning. Remember, the questioning of Marc Elias took place on December the 13th of 2017. December 13th, 2017. That's, 3 years or more ago. So at that time, he was able to get away with answering some of the questions the way he did. He would not be able to answer a lot of these questions in the same way today because of all the information that's now come out. So a lot of the questions that he refused to answer, we now know the answers to those questions because it's been 3 years, and the 5 different IG reports, the congressional hearings, reporters, leaks, whatever. We now know a lot of things. I think the most important question to ask, though, when you look at the fact that you had Katherine Rummler, Obama's personal counsel while he was president, and described by many people as Obama's fixer, who represented almost all these Democrats, you have to ask yourself, why was Rummler the person who was, of all the lawyers that you could get in D.C. to represent all these characters, why did they all have the same lawyer, Rummler, and why was it Rummler? Why was Obama's fixer representing almost all the Democratic rats in these hearings? And I think that the answer to that question is probably most likely that's because what Obama wanted. Because Obama wanted his lawyer representing these people to protect him. And because he wanted to know what went on in these hearings. And if his lawyer is the one that's in these hearings representing all these people, she can make sure that Obama's ass is covered. She can also make sure that Obama gets informed. So I think it's very important to note that it's Obama's fixer lawyer representing all, so far that I've seen, all of these witnesses who would be part of the coup plot, the Democrats, the ones on the other side. She wasn't representing Don Jr. She wasn't representing Mr. Clovis. She wasn't representing Papagalopoulos. No. She's representing all the Democrats who we now know were either involved or in the know about the coup, Spygate, Russiagate, whatever you want to call it. With that in mind, let's go through some of the things that were revealed in Marc Elias's testimony back in December of 2017. And keep in mind, Gowdy and Himes and Patel asked a lot of questions that Elias did not answer because Rummler stopped him from answering. In fact, on 2 occasions during the Elias and on 1 occasion during the Sussman questioning, and Sussman was questioned twice. We've already covered him. She actually stopped the hearing and went outside the room with her client to have discussions outside the room because of something they said that they shouldn't have said. So, she was keeping very, very close security around all these witnesses. And you have to ask yourself, why? In other words, these people didn't just come and say, okay, we have nothing to hide. Let's just get it all out in the open. We're investigating Russia and Trump Russia and all this stuff. But what you find is that these Democrat witnesses, and you don't see it on the Republican side. On the Republican side, they're happy to answer just about any question they're asked. But on the Democrat side, with Katherine Rummler, she starts every hearing by telling them putting up all the obstacles of what she's not going to allow to be asked, or she's not going to allow her client to answer. So keep that in mind. These are hostile witnesses. They're not cooperating witnesses. They're hostile witnesses. So in his testimony, Marc Elias did admit that his client, was the DNC and Hillary for America. Okay? And of course, we just had it confirmed in the London court hearings that in fact the end client for Christopher Steele and Orbis, because remember, they didn't hire Christopher Steele, they hired Orbis Intelligence, Christopher Steele's firm that he owns with Christopher Burrows. When you see the testimony here, Elias definitely makes the designation between the two. He says, well, we really didn't hire Christopher Steele. We hired his firm, Orbis Intelligence, in London. That's very important. It's very important because Orbis Intelligence in London has connections to other private intelligence firms in London, such as Hackloot, where you will find people like Stefan Halper and Alexander Down the Hatch Downer. They also have other associates like Mr. Baumgartner. They have other people that they deal with. So when you get Orbis, you're not just getting Christopher Steele, you're getting his firm, and they have connections and liaisons and arrangements with other players in and around London and Italy and places elsewhere around Europe, and I imagine around the world. Keep that in mind. So Marc Elias admits that his client was the DNC and Hillary for America. And his lawyer says at the very beginning of the hearings that both Hillary for America and the DNC, prior to the hearings, provided her legal instructions on what they would or would not permit or tolerate witnesses to talk about. So the DNC and Hillary for America, prior to the hearings, gave instructions to Rummler of what they would and would not allow the witnesses to testify to based on attorney-client privilege and what they know and what materials they might produce. Marc Elias says it was Confusion GPS who approached him. They did not go looking for Confusion GPS, according to Mr. Elias. Rather, it was Simpson and Peter Frisch, two of the three owners of Confusion GPS, that came to him and said, hey, we've been doing opposition research for a wealthy Republican. We've got all this information. Now the primary is over. We thought you might be interested in continuing with having us continue what we're doing, retaining us, and we'll continue working on this investigation into Trump, and we'll do it this time on your behalf. And so Marc Elias agreed to that. Fusion GPS approached him. That's what he says in his testimony. Glenn Simpson and Peter Frisch. He also says that he had never heard of Confusion GPS before they had approached him. Now, as he goes through his testimony, you will find that that's not exactly a true statement. What we find is that he actually did know who Confusion GPS was, but that he personally had never contracted them before on behalf of a client. But he does this a lot in his testimony. He says something that later he somewhat contradicts. Very, very tricky, because he's lying a lot. So initially he said that he had never heard of Fusion GPS before they approached him. That's hard to believe because the Perkins Coie has been representing the DNC for a very long time, and we know that Obama used Confusion GPS, likely hired through Perkins Coie. But Trey Gowdy apparently didn't know that and never brought it up. But I know that. I know that Obama hired Confusion GPS to do op research on Mitt Romney. It was done likely through Perkins Coie and the DNC. So we now know, we didn't know that back in 2017, but we know that now. So that may be a possible lie right there that Elias committed. He also said, Mr. Elias also said that Robbie Mook was the one who approved the money for him to hire Fusion GPS. Now, when Elias is first asked about how much they were paying Confusion GPS, he said, well, it was split between the DNC 50-50 and the Hillary for America. And he said that the number was about $60,000, $30,000 each. That's what he said, and he left it at that. $60,000, $30,000 each. That's what he said. You'll notice that as Gowdy digs into him farther into the interview, he's finally forced to admit that what he really meant to say was that it was $30,000 to $60,000, or $30,000 for the DNC, $30,000 for the Hillary for America per month. Not overall, per month. The amount was $30,000 to $60,000. Then, as it gets farther into the interview, Gowdy digs at him again on this issue, or no, Himes digs at him again on this issue, and he's forced to admit that, well, it was also expenses, plus expenses. It was 30 to 60,000. It was 30,000 for the DNC, 30,000 for Hillary for America per month, plus expenses. Took a while to dig it out of him. Elias could not remember the exact day or week that he first hired Confusion GPS, but again, first, when he's asked by Gowdy, he says it was in April. To the best of his recollection, it was in April. But later, when being questioned by Himes, I believe it was, or Patel, one of those two, he then says, well, it may have been like March. So he's not sure if it was March or April. He says, Marc Elias says that he would get updates orally, as well as he would get information, emailed to him, but he would have oral conversations with Confusion GPS, usually Simpson, sometimes Frisch, and that those conversations would happen, at first, he said, more than monthly. Later, once Himes dug into him, he had to admit that what he actually meant was every week, basically. He was talking and communicating with either Simpson or Frisch weekly from Fusion GPS. Elias says he first heard the name Christopher Steele in July of 2016. He also said that he did not know who Steele's sources were. And Gowdy pushed him really hard on that point, because Gowdy was saying, you're paying this guy an awful lot of money, he's giving you this information, and you're not asking him where he's getting it, or if he's even verifying it. And Elias essentially would say, well, no, I just, assumed he was, British former intelligence. I assumed his stuff was good, so I didn't press him on that. And he never pressed Simpson or anyone else. He just accepted Steele's information that would be relayed to him through Simpson and Frisch as being true, which is a little bit shaky. You generally wouldn't expect that. Generally, if you're a lawyer representing a campaign and you've got a guy digging up dirt for you and he gives you some dirt, you're probably going to say, okay, are you pretty sure about that? You have good sources on that? Have you verified that? Nope. Elias gives the impression in these questions that, no, he just had Fusion GPS, hired Orbis, he approved of it, and now they're getting all this information. It's being flowed back to him, and he's just accepting it at face value as being true. Elias says that that Fusion hired Orbis, and he approved of it. So in other words, he's saying, Perkins Coie didn't hire Christopher Steele. Perkins Coie hired Confusion GPS, and Confusion GPS hired Orbis Intelligence, but that he, Marc Elias, did sign off on it. He says that Elias says he started informing the Hillary for America campaign about the information he was getting from Simpson, which was coming from Steele, some of it, around the time of the DNC convention, which would have been mid-July. He says that Steele was not talking directly to the Hillary for America campaign as far as he knows, but he said it's very likely that Confusion GPS was talking directly to people at the DNC and probably, most likely, people in the Clinton campaign. He said he's not sure, but he said it's very likely that he would assume that Simpson was talking to people directly at the DNC and the Clinton campaign. He also says that he was communicating with Confusion GPS weekly. So he's talking to Confusion GPS weekly, and he's talking to the Clinton campaign weekly, relaying the information he's getting, keeping them informed. So in other words, what we learned in the London case is that Clinton was well aware of what was going on. Yes, she was getting weekly, and probably more often than that, briefings by Elias, her campaign. And if her campaign was getting it, she was getting it. She's the candidate. Of course she was getting that information. He would not say specifically who he was talking to, but he brings up Robbie Mook as the person he most often communicated with. Sussman, however, who was actually the lawyer for Hillary for America, talked in his testimony about communicating with quite a few different people. He also says, Elias also says that he was getting on a plane and flying to Brooklyn, the headquarters for the Hillary for America campaign, on a weekly basis from the period of around May to June of 2016 till the end of the campaign in October of 2016. Flying to Brooklyn weekly to brief the Clinton campaign. And because they were doing other work for them besides just the opposition research. Here's a biggie. Elias says, now this is very, very important. Elias says that he was advising Confusion GPS on what to explore in their investigation. Very important. Elias admits that he was advising Confusion GPS on what things to explore in their investigation. And who do you think was directing Elias? He's having weekly meetings in Brooklyn. He's communicating directly with Confusion GPS and with the Clinton campaign on a regular basis, feeding them the information he's getting. Or was he actually feeding Confusion GPS information to give to Steele? Which direction was this information flowing? Up until now, it's been assumed that, yeah, he's getting information from Confusion GPS and Christopher Steele via Confusion GPS. But now we know from his testimony and from what we learned in the London case that communication was going both ways. That Elias was in fact directing Confusion GPS, who was then directing Christopher Steele on what to investigate. And where do you think that was coming from? Who is Elias working for? He and Sussman. They're working for Hillary. Probably the most important thing that came out of that witness testimony was Elias saying that he was directing Confusion GPS, who was then directing Christopher Steele, on what to explore in their investigation. Very key piece of information. He told Fusion to look into the Trump-Russia relationship, and he said he began going down that path after the so-called hack at the DNC. He also says it was Michael Sussman who recommended Confusion GPS to him. And of course we know it was Sussman who hired CrowdStrike. He says that he was not talking to the FBI, but that Sussman was. And he knew about that. He also says that Steele was hired in June, but he didn't hear his name until July. Well, it appears that Steele was doing things before June. So either Elias is lying or Steele was working for someone else other than the Washington Free Beacon guy before June. So this is either a lie or Steele was working for someone else, or he was already doing work before he was officially brought in. Elias says that he met Steele in the fall of 2016 at Perkins Coie. That would have been late September. He physically, personally met Christopher Steele. He came to Perkins Coie's offices in Washington. He was accompanied by Simpson, Peter Frisch, and a young woman in her 20s whose name he does not recall. Gowdy asked at that time if it was possibly Nellie Orr. He said, the woman was in her 20s. I don't know who Nellie Orr is, but this woman was a young woman about in her 20s. So that would not be Nellie Orr. Elias says that he did not know Veselnitskaya, Bruce Orr, or Peter's Been Stroking Us. Doesn't know any of them. He said he did not know if Fusion was paying reporters. He said that he was aware that Steele was talking to the media. He said that Fusion GPS, that he was aware that Fusion GPS was the ones who were arranging these media meetups with Steele. He said that he did have knowledge of discussions about which media outlets would be friendly and open to the information that they wanted to get out. He said that he never questioned where Steele got his information for his memos, because that's how he was getting the Steele dossier in memo form, as he would produce one the same way he was doing to the FBI. He would write a memo, give it to the FBI, give it to the State Department, give it to him, give it to her, give it to the media, give it to Perkins Coie, whatever. So they were getting this information at the same time interval that the FBI was getting it. Clinton campaign was getting it. Confusion GPS getting it. Clinton campaign getting it. Perkins Coie getting it. The media get it. They're all getting it at the same interval. Elias said he was the one who dealt with Mook in regards to expenses and fees, and he kept Mook well informed of the expenses and fees on a weekly basis. When he would travel to Brooklyn, he would travel there and give them a cost update on fees, travel expenses, and various other things, in addition to the $60,000 a month that they were getting, half from the DNC, half from the Clinton campaign. Of course, we know from Donna Brazil's book that the Hillary for America, and the DNC were one in the same after Hillary clinched the nomination. The DNC was flat broke. Hillary had to write a check for $850,000 just to keep the lights on at the DNC. And so at that point, she said, well, look, if I'm the one bankrolling all this and the DNC's flat broke, I'm paying for everything, then we're going to call all the shots. And as is noted in Donna Brazil's book, that's exactly what happens. All decisions, financial, personnel, the campaign, everything, every decision was being made from the Brooklyn headquarters of the Hillary for America campaign. They were one and the same, even though they make it sound like they were two different entities. The money was all coming from the Rotten Reverend. The decisions were all being made by the Rotten Reverend. Elias says that the total amount of money paid to Perkins Coie from the DNC and Clinton campaign during 2016 was somewhere around $5 to $6 million. $5 to $6 million. He says about $1 million of that went to Confusion GPS, who then paid Christopher Steele or Orbis Intelligence. So that is what we learned from Elias. A lot of questions that he was asked he would not answer because Katherine Rummler, Obama's fixer, would not allow him to answer. And a lot of those questions that they ask, we now know the answers to them because it's now been over 3 years. And so a lot of this information has now come out. But I can tell you the general demeanor of Elias throughout this hearings. He stumbles over his words a lot. He uses, I can't be exactly sure. He can't be exactly sure about anything. This guy would hardly ever, just like Sussman, and just like all these Democrat witnesses, would hardly ever give a actual straight answer. All their answers would always be prefaced by, I can't really be 100% sure, but I think this. I think it was this much. I think it was this date. I think he said it. I think she said it. I can't recall. I don't remember. Do I have to answer that question? I thought I already answered that question. Blah, 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 blah. You get this type of stuff all through these testimonies.